All right, a Freilich in Purim. It is the first Megillah reading, or the night of the first Megillah reading. I just came back from Shul and from Megillah, Baruch Hashem. But as busy as tonight is, we will not interrupt our 30 letters in 30 days. The only thing that interrupts our 30 letters in 30 days is Shabbos. And what we do because of that is we do a double letter on Thursday night. So we have a letter for tonight and for tomorrow night. We're going to learn them both now. So a Freilich and Purim to all of you. And, you know, yesterday I busted out the Keilah Chabad Pushka app in the middle of the shir because the Rebbe had mentioned the importance of coupling our learning with acts of tzedakah. So we're learning the Rebbe's letters to prepare for Yud Af Nisan and to give the Rebbe a gift of Torah study. But also we want to do tzedakah also in the merit of the Rebbe's upcoming birthday. So I'm going to do a little more tzedakah. This time I'll remember to unsilence my phone. Okay, I'm using a little Chabad push gap. I'm going to do a little dollar here. Not a big spender. I'm not going to do it like $10. There's a $10 button, but I'm going to do a little $1 button here. And we just added $1. You know what? It's Purim. We'll do another. And then this cool trick. I wonder if the sound gets different depending on how full it is. My pushka is at $9 and it has a $36 capacity. I guess we'll find out. Okay. Anyways, Why am I doing this? Because today is Purim. Now, Matanas Levyanim actually for the halacha is tomorrow, but it's always a good time to give tzedakah. And maybe people are listening to this on replay, and it's already tomorrow, day of Purim. Okay, so that was fun. Let's jump into our letter for tonight. I made a bracha earlier just before we started rolling. L'chaim. It's Gatorade. I'm breaking my fast. Refreshing. Okay. Tonight's two letters actually go together. They're to the same person. And they are part of one long story. I will begin. Baruch Hashem Ches Kislev Tavshin Yud Ches Brooklyn. Havasik v'chosid Isher Elkim Nechem v'noyim Melachtei Melech HaShamayim Merino Rav Dovid Avram Shiachya. Okay, who is Dovid Avram? Dovid Leselbaum. Olav Shalom. Rebbe Dovid was a great chassid he lived in Kfar Chabad. He was involved all of his life in Afatzat Hamayonis and spreading the wellsprings of chassidus in French. And he was originally from France, from Paris specifically. And actually the story of how he became frum is actually somewhat of a miracle story of the Rebbe. He was a hidden child during the war. And after the war, I think he had a brother who was also in hiding. They were hidden by non-Jews. And after the war, they were able to return to their family. And he said, actually, they were so irreligious that religiously there wasn't really much of a difference between being in hiding with non-Jews and being home with his family, unfortunately. But he did have a grandmother who was a little bit more traditional or sensitive to tradition. And here's where the story actually happens. His grandmother basically is the one who got him started with bar mitzvah lessons at the Rashi Shul, which was in the neighborhood, and that's where he started to get involved in Yiddishkeit and slowly became not just fully Torah observant, but he became a Lubavitcher Chassid, and eventually he moved to Eretz Yisrael. He lived in Kfar Chabad. He was one of the early residents of Kfar Chabad. Years later, when he was already married, he was living in Kfar Chabad, he was an adult, he was sitting at a Fabrengen, and one of the older Russian Chassidim was talking, It was, I think it was Rabbi Sudakevich, and he was talking about how, yes, when he came out of Russia, he was in Paris for a time. Many Chabad Chassidim, when they came out of Russia after the war, were in Paris for a short time. It was like a transitional place for a lot of people. And he said in 1947, when the Rebbe came back to Europe, a lot of people don't know about this, the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin lived in Paris, but then after they came to America, the Rebbe went back to Paris to arrange his mother, Rebbetzin Chana's, immigration to America. So the Rebbe actually lived in Paris for a short time, for a few months, in 1947. This is after the war. And there were many Lubavitcher Chassidim there who were from Russia, and they were temporarily in Paris. Anyways, the Rebbe, while he was in Paris, made a strong statement that Chassidim need to walk in the streets and be visibly Jewish. And he impressed this upon certain Chassidim, one of whom was Rabbi Sodakevich. And so he said he and I think another Chassid were walking down the street in Paris one day, doing basically what the Ramash, as the Rebbe was known in those days, had told them to do, which is just walk the streets being visibly Jewish. And they did so, and an old woman opened up a window on the 5th floor of an apartment building and started shouting to them, you're Jews. Like, she recognized them. You're religious. I have a grandson who needs bar mitzvah lessons. And so it was, they arranged that little young David should have his bar mitzvah lessons. So he realized only years later as an adult, wow, his whole Seder Ishtalshlis, the whole story, I guess you could call it the whole Megillah in honor of Purim, really started because of something that the Rebbe had made a point to say and to empower others to do. Okay, so let's continue here. La'achrei hefsik hachi orach niskabel michtove me Chav Zayin Cheshvan. After a long interruption, I received your letter from Chav Zayin Cheshvan. Okay, I'm going to give a little bit of timing here. You see, the Rebbe's letter here to Reb Dovid is in Kislev. Reb Dovid's letter to the Rebbe was in Cheshvan. Reb Dovid's letter is describing events that took place in Tishrei, as the Rebbe is about to say right here. And I'm going to fill in a little bit more in a second what happened during Tishrei. V'neyam li likrois by Roshei Prokim, that's the Rosh Tevis, the Roshei Prokim, the bullet points. It was pleasant for me to read the bullet points mipu'olais of B'chedesh Tishrei ha'aver during the past Tishrei. Okay. I'm going to fill in the blanks here. In Kfar Chabad, Simchas Torah was like a big event, not just for Chassidim, but like the idea of having Hakafis on, in Eretz Yisrael, there's one day. It's not a second day of Shmini Atzeres. So Chassidim have a thing that on the second day, which would be Simchas Torah and Chutz La'aretz, they have Hakafis. So it's sort of like, call it an attraction. People come from outside of the Kfar, people who are not even Lubavitch, and it's an attraction. It also was sort of I don't want to say this in a crass way, but I think it's pretty accurate, and someone can correct me if I'm not saying it respectfully enough, but I think it was sort of a photo op for politicians. To the extent where even politicians who were not necessarily so religious at all, and in fact, this story itself indicates that that is the case, they would make an appearance at the Hakafas and Simchas Torah in Kfar Chabad. There was a particular politician, an extremely secular, more than secular, anti-religious, not just not religious, but anti-religious, vocally, vehemently anti-religious, as were many of that ilk at that time, named... he's referred to in the letters here as Mr. Zerubavel, or Mr. Zion. He's called Mr. Zion, Mar Zion, just the initial, but it's Zerubavel. I think Dovid Zerubavel. And he was basically him and Ben Gurion and Ben Tzvi. Those three, you could say, were like sort of they were colleagues, very comparable in their sort of staunchly secular identity. And that's the background. Mar Zion, Mr. Zion, Mr. Zerubavel, came to the Hakafas, and it so happened that he was married to a Leselbaum, who was distant relatives with Dovid Leselbaum, And they ended up striking up a conversation. I think they danced even, and they sort of made a connection. Okay. So Rabbi Dovid is writing to the Rebbe a month after Simchas Torah, right? Because the letter that says that Rabbi Dovid's letter was Chav Zayin Cheshvan. So it's a month after Tishrei, and Rabbi Dovid's reporting to the Rebbe that he encountered Zerubavel, this very anti-religious, left-wing politician. And now the Rebbe is writing back about sort of what might be the way to proceed with that. Okay. וכיוון שכפי כוסו נפגש מפעם לפעם עם מר זרובבל שיחיה, שבוודאי ידוע לי שכוח השפעה להנ"ל בחוג מסוים די רחב. Now, you met Mr. Zerubavel, and you know that he has an immense influence. He was a big speaker. He was very passionate. He had a big, he was an influencer, to use the language of today. Tzarich haya lenatzel kol pigisha ledivrei hisayrus. So anytime you meet him, you have to use that as an opportunity for hisayrus, to arouse him, spiritually to arouse him. Which is funny because like this guy was so anti-religious. You would think, if I can just get in and get out without ruffling any feathers, Dayeno, right? But here the Rebbe is actually pushing that no, this chassid should try to, because Mr. Zerubavel has such a strong influence in his circles, he's a respected person, it's really important to work on him to become more open to Yiddishkeit. וכיוון שפעולייסו של הנ"ל בכיוון בלתי רצוי הוא בעיקר מאשר יסרגל ביסר. Now, a very interesting, I mean, I think a fascinating insight. The Rebbe says here, since this guy's negative influence is mostly because of habituation, because he became accustomed to it, not because he thought about it now and came to a conclusion. Maybe he thought about it once upon a time when he was younger, but now it's more just habit. Meaning, the Rebbe, I don't know, I'm just, personally for me, in today's day of Twitter or X or whatever you call it, and all the garbage that's out there, and just the poisonous rhetoric, and it can become very intimidating, like, wow, you know, even Jews say such terrible things. And the Rebbe is saying, you know what? A lot of people say terrible things, and they have a platform, and they have a whole identity of saying these things, and they don't even deeply believe it. It's not out of any deep conviction at this point. It just, again, to use the language 2025, and maybe this is crass, maybe I'm wrong, but we might say in 2025, he's just a grifter. He's a grifter. He doesn't really believe it. So the Rebbe says, Mr. Zerubavel is saying like awful things against Yiddishkeit, but he doesn't really mean it. He's just used to doing. That's his shtick. That's his shtick. That's what he's known for. That's my thing. That's my routine. Okay. Hine. So therefore, im yeru midei pam b'pam mibli hedef. If you keep on trying to get to him without let up, al geidel hahezek. Wow. Regarding the terrible damage, v'achurban, and the destruction, shagoydem ideza, that he's causing. I'm just going to stop. I'm going to read into this. I may be taking liberties, but it's basically you're saying to a guy, listen, you don't even deeply, passionately feel this way anymore. You're doing it because it's your shtick, but stop a second. Think about every time you open your mouth, people are taking you seriously, and you're causing destruction. You should be using your talents. You're a talented guy. You should be using your talents to increase goodness in the world, and not just in the world in general, although also the world in general, meaning for the non-Jewish world, but specifically for the Jewish world. You should be doing good things for the whole world and for the Jews. So if you keep doing that, then in the end, it will have an effect. The words will have their effect. The truth will win in the end, even if it takes time. Okay. So let's continue. They're very, very powerful, I think. Okay. Moving shebinirin zeh val derech zeh ho'ikav etzel anal hachigadol yeh al pi amaduber betchilas kol daled chelkei shulchan aruch Al yivash. I'm sorry about the nekudis in the PDF. A lot of them are wrong. Al yivash mipnei hamaligim. So if there's any resistance in this area, you got to understand it really comes down to what it says in the beginning of Shulchan Aruch, which is the first halacha, because it's the basis for all other halachas. Because if you can't do this, you won't be able to keep anything else. Is do not be ashamed before the mockers, the scoffers. Okay, in other words. This is a tough thing to tell a guy who's respected and has a reputation, but basically saying to him, listen, you can come out and totally reverse your position, and yeah, you're going to get harassed. Yeah, you'll get flamed. I'll use the language of 2025. Maybe I'm not even 2025. Maybe this is 2022. Okay, you're going to get flamed on Twitter. All right? Yeah, no, so? Now it's understood the commotion that will erupt in his circles. If he'll think seriously about his approach, and comes to an opposite conclusion, I think is the way you say it. It's an expression from the Gemara. It's without embellishment. It's actually the Gemara of Ketzad Meraknu Lifnei Hakala. How do you praise the bride? So, Balei Kochol V'Sadak, without embellishment, without adornment, meaning as it is. Like, just you say it as it is. I like him. He says it as it is. All right. Aval al pi hanishma hine mepuloisav ad ata loy nisrashim kol kach medas harev. So, yeah. The Rebbe is making, I think, an observation that Mr. Zerubavel is sort of known as being like an independent thinker. Like, he's supposedly supposed to like be strong-minded and not be swayed by popular opinion. So if he can use that temperament in negativity, meaning to be like sort of like a renegade, so how much more so, which if the midah paranis is that way, the midah toiva is abundantly more, he should use that independent thinking to come out and say something that his friends are all going to be really upset about. And okay, let the chips fall where they may. He should come out and say, listen, guys, chavra, everything I told you so far, I was mistaken. I was wrong. And you know, how much more so when you're talking about negative things, a person shouldn't just rely that they're always right. How much more so when you're trying to change your position to something good, don't rely that you're always right. In other words, it's okay to change your position. God willing, you will also not be ashamed. You're going to speak to him about everything we spoke about, and you're going to speak to him truthfully. And of course, you'll speak sincerely from the heart. We're already guaranteed that words from the heart will enter the heart. Now, it's understood if you want to mention to him in your conversation with him that we have spoken, according to what I just wrote to you, go ahead. In other words, sometimes it's better to mention the Rebbe, sometimes you feel like it's better not to. If you think it'll help at all getting the job done, that's what I'll call gufa inyan, the bottom line. Okay. All right. And then you have permission also to add. Ella. For sure, when you're speaking to Mr. Zerubavel, you'll say to him, I'm sure you've had doubts about your position, even though you're like at the leadership of this movement. I'm sure you've questioned it, and that you silence your doubts. As soon as they pop up in your brain, you push them away. Like is the nature of people. People are afraid to reevaluate their path in life. It takes a lot of courage. But dafka, because he has such influence, if he will fix himself, that act that he'll do in fixing himself will be amplified because he's an influential person, and that change that he undertakes will then be expressed in at least many of the people that he influences. So it's certain, because what's at stake here, that any change he makes for the better will be amplified by all the people he influences, that you can't really hesitate. You got to go for this. It's very important. Chazal, like this, the teaching of our sages, asher af shachelu ba'atzmei pater al koponim bidei adam. A person who injures himself, you're not allowed to do it, and bidei shamayim, in the heavenly court one is accountable, but you can't be punished for it bidei adam. In the human court, you can't be punished for hurting yourself. So even though if you hurt yourself, you're technically, off the hook. But if you're hurting others, right? So this is not just about you. You're an influential person, Mr. Zerubavel. Now, if you need an oisumephis, if you need a sign when you're going to him, to impress him that he should take you seriously, asher bo ha'es libikoides oid hapam al shitase ba'aver, where he should criticize, he should examine he should critique his own ideology. If you need a sign, ois and a mephis, that Rebbe calls it, that he should take you seriously in this suggestion of critiquing his supposedly staunchly held ideology. Yeloi, here's what you'll tell him if you need a sign, if he should listen to you. It should be for you, hachaloim shibasamach ledebure imai, the dream that he just had before speaking to you. What's that? What's that? The Rebbe says to Dovid Leselbaum that when you meet with Mr. Zerubavel and you tell him, look, we all know that you haven't really thought about this ideology deeply in a long time. You're doing this because it's your shtick, and you've had doubts, and you've silenced the doubts. But maybe it's time, because at least for the effect that you have on so many other people who listen to you, maybe you should re-examine your beliefs. And the Rebbe says, if you want to tell him it's coming from me, you can tell him it's coming from me. And once you're on a roll and you're telling him it's coming from me, meaning coming from the Rebbe, and you want to say to him, listen, and you want to know if you should take me seriously? Okay, think about the dream you just had. I don't know what dream he just had. What's weirder to me is that the Rebbe is saying the dream he just had close to the time we spoke, not the dream he already had. Now, maybe I'm reading too much into it. But as is going to become clear as we read on to the next letter, they didn't meet for several more months. So is the Rebbe talking about a dream that Zerubavel had, or is he talking about a dream that the Rebbe will... the Rebbe's not saying, okay, I'm reading too much into it. The Rebbe's not saying he's going to make the dream. The Rebbe's not saying he's going to communicate to him in a dream. That's all me just adding, I don't want to add anything here. The Rebbe's just saying, when you meet with him, which I know for a fact, because it's public record, that he didn't meet with him until 3 months later, tell him if you need an ois u'meifus, it's the dream that you just had, whatever that is. Okay. The rest of the letter is about other things. It's about his apartment, which is very, very important. And we know from learning the Rebbe's letters how much the Rebbe gave serious thought and time and care to people's personal matters, like where they live and things like that. But I'm going to jump ahead. I usually don't skip any part of any letter, but I'm going to skip ahead to letter 2. If you're looking in the PDF, it's on page 4 out of 5. Chaim, I'm going to have a little more Gatorade. Second letter, Baruch Hashem, Dalad Adar, Tavshin Yud Ches, Brooklyn. Havasik v'chosed Yishir Elokim Nechmed Noi Malachte Melechus Shemaim. V'neinu Reb Dovid Sheyichah Shalom Avracha. B'mainel Michtave Im HaPiska HaMusgara Bei. In answer to your letter, and the enclosed note. Okay, this letter you see is from Adar. Leselbaum meets Zerubavel in Tishrei. He writes to the Rebbe in Cheshvan. The Rebbe responds in Kislev. The meeting happens in Adar, meaning we have a gap here of Tevis and Shvat. Okay, and the Rebbe's letter was the beginning of Kislev, so we have almost the whole Kislev, we have the whole Tevis, the whole Shvat. It was a few months. Rabbi Dovid Leselbaum was afraid. He was nervous. The Rebbe actually anticipated he might be nervous. He says, you also have to follow the advice of the Shulchan Aruch, or the mandate of the Shulchan Aruch, not to be embarrassed of the scoffers. He was nervous. He was like, how is this guy going to take it? He's such, you have to understand, I wish that they had Twitter in the 50s and you could pull up, Zerubavel's Twitter account and see him bashing religion, right? So imagine this. You're supposed to go follow up on what? Because you danced with the guy, Simchas Torah, at a political photo op, because his wife is your third cousin or whatever it was. And now you're going to call the guy and show up and be like, by the way, I know you don't really mean all the stuff that you're always saying. Yeah, re-examine it, change your ways, admit you were wrong. Oh, and if you don't believe me, think about the dream you just had. So he was he pushed it off. Okay, eventually he gathers the moxie, and I believe he made a phone call to Zerubavel, and he's like, I would like to follow up with you. And to his surprise, Zerubavel was like, absolutely, come to meet me in my office in Tel Aviv, and let's talk. Like, he was very enthusiastic about having a meeting. So they come to the meeting, or they meet together, and so Rabbi Leselbaum was so nervous, he says, I couldn't even form the words, I just read the letter. Interestingly, Mr. Zerubavel stood the whole time like a chassid. That's the way it struck me. When they read the Rebbe's letter at a chuppah and they say, everyone please rise. Okay. So he stood listening to the letter word for word. Afterwards, he asked Rabbi Dovid Leselbaum to give him the letter. Now, he didn't want to give him the original. He says, I'll make a copy. But making copies wasn't just run to the copy store. Making copies was a whole big ordeal back then, especially in Eretz Yisrael. So it was more like, it'll take a while and I'll get back to you. And that's what this letter is. Basically, yes, we had the meeting. Here's how he took it. He asked me on the spot for a copy of the letter. I haven't given him a copy of the letter yet. That's basically what Rabbi Leselbaum writes. Okay, so the Rebbe writes back. I read that. I was very happy to read. I share safe. Safe. I'm not going to call that a little dig, but it's like it took 3 months. That ultimately, Allah biyade l'kayim b'kashasi, that you were able to fulfill my request. V'limse lamar zayin, and to convey a message to Mr. Zayin, Zerubavel Shichya, as advarim, the words. V'toiv b'miyuchad, and it was especially good. Shalai nichnis l'chol v'chuchim v'chol shakra v'tarya. You did not get into any debate or back and forth. Such important advice, I think, for all of us, that in today's world of heated extremist rhetoric, don't debate. I was just talking to a guy yesterday who was saying, me and my friends, we're not particularly religious. After October 7th, we had a wake-up call as far as our Jewish identity, and we're getting sick and tired of the Jewish people who are not on the same page with us. We can't deal with them anymore. And I said, first of all, it's great that you and your friends are having this wake-up call as far as your Jewish identity. Secondly, the fact that you're getting sick and tired dealing with the Jews who have not had that awakening, let me just advise how to avoid that burnout. I said, have you been trying to debate with them and convince them? He said, yeah, that's all we do. I said, that's why you're getting burnt out. Just give them chicken soup. The secret is I said, just show them love. Oh, and offer them mitzvahs. Obviously, offering them mitzvahs, putting on tefillin, learning Torah, but don't get into debates. It's not productive. Okay. So I'm glad that you didn't debate with him. Ki lo zu akvana, that was not my intent. Val piza moving gamkin shigam lahaba ein loy lekones bevichuchim b'zeh. For sure, don't in the future get involved in any debates. V'harei asa shlichusi. You've done my shlichus. V'gam ani asisi shlichusi shali, and I have done my shlichus. The Rebbe had a shlichus. The Rebbe had something that he needed to get done. Whatever it is, how a Rebbe gets a shlichus, I don't know. What it had to do with the dream, I don't know. But the Rebbe had a shlichus to do, and he's thanking the chassid, Rabbi Dovid Leselbaum. Thank you. You did your part. I did my part. We've done what we needed to do. Okay. Mizem moving gamkin she'ein mokim lishlech hapiska. You don't have to send the note. I'm not sure what note that is. B'negeya be'im lishlech la'anal. Okay, now, regarding whether you should send him the copy of my letter, because remember, Mr. Zerubavel asked for the letter. So whether or not you should follow, and David never gave him the letter, so whether or not you should follow up with him and give him the letter. It doesn't have to come from you. If Mr. Zayin, Mr. Zerubavel, meets you or writes to you, the Yiddish and specifically requests a copy of the letter, then give it to him. But until then, don't do anything. Just leave it alone. Leave it alone. I hope that your daughter's health has gotten better and even more. I also look forward to good news in that area as well. That's the end of the letter. And just incredible. Oh, so what happened in the end? So Rabbi Dovid Leselbaum says, I never really spoke to Mr. Zerubavel after that. The whole thing about the letter, he never followed up with it. The Rebbe told me don't push the Inyan. He says, listen, I don't know what happened to him, but I can tell you this. He passed away 9 years later, and this guy who was such a staunch, anti-religious voice had frum children and grandchildren, which was not the case before this letter. So apparently whatever the Rebbe wanted to accomplish was accomplished. Okay, Chavra, a Freilichen Purim, this is a special time, a powerful time for the mazel of Bnei Yisrael, and we should spread good, positive messages, even to people who were afraid are not ready to listen. It's okay. And if you need an oisu moifis, it's chutzpah for me to say, but you can tell them that you learned a letter from the Rebbe, and the letter encouraged you to reach out to people with love and to offer them a connection to Yiddishkeit without any debates, without any rhetoric. Okay, Freilich and Purim.